I'm so thrilled to be with you guys, and just a very, very big thank you to the Center for Graduate Life for inviting me to be a speaker with you all today. And I am going to share my screen. Okay, all right. And Laura and Jill are both going to help me with monitoring the chat along the way here. So if any of you guys have questions along the way, you're welcome to pop those into the chat. I also have some things that I want to get some feedback from you all on, and we're going to utilize the chat function for that aspect as well. So today we're talking about STEM communication. And really just kind of getting the basic overview of the fundamentals of what makes for really good STEM communication. How can we talk about our science, technology, engineering, and math research with diverse audiences in ways that are really effective and that will help us achieve the goals that we have? And so I want to get us started by talking a bit about the who we all are, and getting a sense of who's in the room, and you know, a bit about each other. And so Aura, thank you so much for the introduction about me. As she said, I was formerly at Duke Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, and so cognitive neuroscience and psychology is my background. And so I'll try to use STEM, but I will probably say scientist as a shorthand at various points in time. That's sort of my own bias, but please know I work very, very closely with many, many folks in, say, our College of Computing and Informatics or our College of Engineering, and I'm counting everybody today here as scientists. So if I say science, I mean it really globally and inclusively as STEM. And so when I was a postdoc at Duke, I had the great opportunity to do a science communication training program that was for postdocs and faculty. And it was similar to this program that some of you are in now, where it was about 8 weeks, different topic every week. And we got really great hands-on training in talking about our research in different types of settings, like, for example, giving a media interview, writing an op-ed for a newspaper, or just giving a public audience's talk. So I really loved that training, and it really inspired me to continue to engage in broad ways to talk about science and to highlight scientists from broad areas. And so I'm very active on Twitter, talking about science communication and highlighting work in the SciComm area. And I had also talked with the Center for Graduate Life a couple years ago now. I said, you know, I have this background in science communication, this training, and I'd love to be able to bring some of that here to UNC Charlotte. And so I started doing workshops for the Center for Graduate Life on STEM communication, talking about your research with broad audiences, talking with the media. Those have been very popular workshops, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you all about these topics today. I've also worked with undergraduate classes here at UNC Charlotte, say software engineering, where they make products in their courses and they want to be able to talk about these technology products that they're building and how they might want to explain them to, say, an industry partner. And so I've gone into classroom settings to talk with undergrads about how they can pitch some of their work to, say, business leaders or industry investors. And so that's been very fun as well. And so I would love if everybody here, we have a decent sized group of over 30 people, so we're going to utilize the chat function. So if people could type into the chat box, I'd love if you could introduce your name, your program, kind of maybe one little bit about your research topic area, if you will. And if our STEM communication fellows, if the 8 of you could also please let us know who you are so we can celebrate you guys today as well. So if people could write into the chat to sort of introduce each other to yourselves. I love seeing all the diverse research topics that people have. It's so interesting when I do these workshops to get to know a little bit about everyone's research. And we do such cool work here at UNC Charlotte. I love seeing just the broad range of what goes on. Welcome, Savani. Chris Avery, say you're using machine learning. I use machine learning in my research as well. Exciting. Thank you. I like your currently working on Sleeping Beauty transposase. Yes, it's actually called Sleeping Beauty. Welcome. Always glad to have STEM fellows here with us. Nanoscience, nanoscale science, a new student. I have not yet started working on any topic yet. Well, welcome. I'm really excited when first year graduate students or new students in general take advantage of the great offerings that the Center for Graduate Life has. I think they're such a fantastic campus resource, and it's so good to be involved in very early. All right, well, thank you all. You can keep writing in if you haven't put yours in yet. And then if you could add to this channel, why you personally are interested in STEM communication. So if you could use this chat function, just give me a sentence or two on why you personally are interested in talking about STEM topics with others, whatever avenues you're interested in. I just want to get a sense of people's motivations here. I agree, Bryce. Our research is rather pointless if we cannot communicate it with others. Yes. Maria says, it's important to be able to communicate our work and research and translate into application and practice. Yes, that translation idea, that is so important. I spent a long time in basic science, and to be able to translate basic science into applied science or into, say, treatments or translational science, that is extremely important. Here at UNC Charlotte, I run an applied research program, and so I quite literally have to translate the educational research program I do into a way that makes sense to senior leaders in higher ed. Sarvani, I like your point. There's a lot of groundbreaking research going on, yet I'm not aware of the ones going on in other fields and vice versa. So just keeping abreast of diverse fields and learning about cool science and cool technology events that are going on worldwide. I find that really interesting part of science communication as well. I really like sharing science on Twitter for that reason, because you can connect in with other people on topics that you're just interested in learning more about. Destiny writes, my research impacts over half of the world population. That's a really high impact. Being able to communicate with people the importance of fresh water is invaluable. I really love that. That's great. Okay. Chris Avery, you have a good point here. My research is highly interdisciplinary, so being able to communicate ideas others may not be familiar with is critical for an effective research environment. I really like that point. A lot of science and STEM work at UNC Charlotte is really highly interdisciplinary. And so, for example, I am an education researcher, but I work very closely with folks in our College of Computing and Informatics. And they will use terminology that's just right over my head, vice versa, in fact. And so being able to talk clearly, even with just my research collaborators, requires using really simple and concise terms and defining my jargon clearly. And so I think that's important even just for my day-to-day work. Okay. Right, these are fantastic. I love all of these ideas that you have. I think in general, people are motivated for getting involved in STEM communication for a lot of the areas that you're suggesting. So things including building awareness, and that can be awareness of your work for others or awareness of just work going on in a field in general. Becoming more aware yourself of diverse STEM research going on worldwide. Building trust in science. This kind of speaks back to what Aura was talking about at the top of this, of all of the events that have been swirling around in the year 2020 and the role that STEM plays in public discourse. I really like to use STEM communication to highlight diverse scientists and to really amplify their messages, especially on platforms like Twitter. And I think there's also a role that STEM communication plays in, excuse me, in a call to action. So if we want to persuade others to do something, like let's say we want to persuade the public to recycle, we need to know how to talk to people to get them on board with the call to action that we as scientists want them to engage in. So these are all fantastic motivations. I'm so excited to get to talk with you all today about these topics. And so I think because you all are here, I think you will agree with me that communicating to non-expert audiences is really important and critical. And I think it's as evergreen as ever in the year 2020. I think it's really important as a STEM researcher that we have a role in shaping public discourse and influencing public policy. Sorry, I've been on too many Zoom meetings today. And so when I was at Duke, I had a role as an editor on a science policy website where they would write pieces about legislation going through the federal government or through, say, like the FDA, their policy, for example. And if it was on a topic in neuroscience, they would tag me and they would say, hey, can you take a look at this article and make sure that we're getting the neuroscience part of this correct? And so they would write pieces, for example, there was legislation going through about, say, traumatic brain injuries and treatment for soldiers coming back from the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I would read through it, and I would make sure that the points on the traumatic brain injury were correctly conveyed to the public. And then they would follow that legislation through the whole path of committees and voting, et cetera. Excuse me. As a STEM researcher, it's also important to be able to communicate clearly to secure grant funding, which is really important to continue our research. Your reviewers will never necessarily be in your specific niche area of work. And so talking to a broader audience is really important there. When you want to give effective presentations, and this includes teaching our undergraduates, it's important to be a clear STEM communicator. And for many of you, when you leave UNC Charlotte and you're on the job market and you want to land your next job, you're going to be asked in those interview situations to explain your work and why it's relevant. And so to be able to land that next job, it's also really important to communicate clearly. So I think there's a big disconnect, however, between how we train our graduate students and what makes for effective public communication. So as academics, we're really focused on thinking about the background of our research. You have to absorb the whole body of literature that led up to your research question, all of the details. And then your little results and conclusions are like the little tiny final points, right? It's like I'm adding this little bit to this really big piece of literature, this big body of knowledge. The public, however, thinks really differently. They want to know, what's the bottom line? So what? So why do I care about what you're telling me? Why does it matter to me? And then they wanted you to get into the details and the extra layers of interest about what's going on with your research topic. And so I find that it's really a flip from how we think about our work as STEM researchers, where that kind of bottom line needs to come right up front and right first, which is why I talked to you guys first about why you want to be engaged in STEM communication. And so it's really important that we speak to the values of our audience by giving them that so what, why do they care right off the bat. You know, we've been talking about this idea of being in the year 2020 and what does that mean for being a STEM researcher and engaging the public in discourse related to STEM topics. I was listening a couple of days ago to the author Thomas Hager gave a talk at NC State, and he was talking about what it means to talk about science in what we call sometimes this post-truth world. What does it mean in this day and age? So what does it mean to even be a scientist or a STEM researcher in a post-truth world? And so for a long time, scientists and those working in STEM have thought that there was just simply a problem where we just needed to increase the public's scientific literacy. If we could just simply provide the public with more science knowledge and more facts, this lack of understanding or this lack of caring about issues that are near and dear to our heart as scientists would suddenly go away. And so I think you can see that kind of concept very clearly in how scientists for many, many years approached the issues of climate change, where we thought, we'll just keep telling the public all of these facts about climate change, and somebody at some point is going to care about this big thing happening. But what we have learned and what we have now become more savvy to is that simply throwing facts and throwing knowledge at the public really is not an effective communication strategy. Information only gets you so far in this post-truth world. And so in the era where scientific facts are now argued about and debated like they never have been before, it's really important to be able to communicate clearly and effectively. And the way that you're going to do that is not by simply throwing more and more knowledge and more facts at your audience, but it's about really connecting to that audience through their core values and by framing your communications in a way that speak to those core values. So getting back to the idea of climate change, when you reframe that issue in a way that resonates with a particular target audience's core values, you can suddenly start to get some people caring about the issue of climate change. So say, for example, you're talking to people in our state of North Carolina. Climate change causes stronger storms, stronger hurricanes. We care about our beach properties and the health of our tourism industry at the coast. So framing those issues in terms of economic impact to our coastal communities, that's going to get you a lot further in talking about climate change and its relevance to North Carolina than just simply, again, throwing facts about our projections and what we currently know about the science of climate change. And so we're going to talk today about how you do that and how you kind of think about your audience and frame things in that way. And so my hope for you guys is that you'll be able at the end of this to really kind of level up your communications with others in whatever shape or form that those might be taking. And I'm really going to challenge you all as you go through this series with the Center for Graduate Life to think about what opportunities you might be able to engage in. So maybe something will come across your email of an opportunity to serve as an editor for something, or to do an event at a K-12 school, or to talk to a classroom of students via a Zoom presentation. I'm really going to encourage you guys to just start saying yes to some of these opportunities to get some practice, because practicing talking with others is really valuable in order to level up your skills in this area. So I'm pretty active on Twitter, talking to other people who work in the domain of science communication. And one of the people I really like to talk with online is Dr. Alexis Willett, who has a handbook coming out. I think it's not out yet, but it's coming out soon. So I'm going to have to look at this when it's published, on science communication made easy. And so I asked her, okay, I'm giving this workshop. What are your tips for success? And so these are some of the things that she said that I thought were brilliant and completely agreed with. And so we're going to go through and we're going to talk about some of these things here. And so she is really big on planning in advance whenever you're communicating with others, and having that advanced plan, she says, is so critical for success. I really agree with that. And so she talks about this 6-step process wherein you're communicating with others. First, identifying your goal. What is your goal that you wanted to achieve with this communication? 2, thinking really, really clearly about who your audience is. And I find this is an issue that people new to the area of science communication have to really work on, is really honing their understanding of their audience. 3, you want to consider the channel that you're using for communication. Are you giving a talk? Are you using social media? Are you doing a TikTok video? Are you talking to a journalist? How are you communicating your work? Are there any potential barriers that would inhibit the audience from receiving your message? And then there's the actual content about what you're going to say and how you prioritize the pieces of your research that are really important for your audience to hear. And so usually it's about being very, very selective and highlighting things for people, rather than, again, throwing every little fact and detail and background piece at folks. And then, because I'm in the world of assessment as well, I love her point 6, plan your evaluation. So how would you know if you were successful at communicating to others? How would you know if you achieved your goal? And so we'll talk about some suggestions for how you can evaluate your success along the way. And I will say we're always learning, we're always getting experience. And especially as you work across different audiences or different communication channels, it's all about learning and growing along the way. And so thinking about how you can evaluate your success helps inform you of how you can, do even better next time. What lessons can you learn and improve on for next time around? So I would love if you could tell me in the chat some of what your goals for STEM communication are. And specifically, I want you to think about 2 things here. One might be a relatively easier goal that you wish to achieve with your STEM communication. And then 2 might be some type of dream goal you have. And so I'll give you an example as you're thinking, and then please start typing some things into the chat so we can see what your potential goals might be. So as an example, maybe you want to get kids excited about STEM, and an achievable goal, relatively easy achievable goal, might be giving a classroom or virtual classroom presentation about STEM to, say, elementary school age kids. You could probably do that. You could probably arrange that without too much effort. A stretch goal for that might be, I want to reach millions of kids across the world by hosting my own science show on Netflix. That would be like a really big stretch dream goal. I want everybody to just take a moment, enter in the chat, an easier goal and a stretch or dream goal that you have for communicating your STEM research with others? All right, so I see to give a science or research presentation talk smoothly, achievable goal. Yes, I agree you can achieve that goal. And being a professor is your stretch goal. That's fantastic. Venki, I love your point here. Easy, have a great elevator pitch ready. I love that one. I do a lot of workshops for both graduate students and undergraduates on elevator pitches, which for those who don't know are like a 30-second to 2-minute short bit about here's my great idea or here's my research in a nutshell. Basically like something you can communicate in the length of an elevator ride with somebody who you want to connect with. Right? April says she wants to create her own technology-based reading intervention program for K-3 students. And then she'd like to share with female students in particular how she joined STEM using reading, which is her passion. That sounds fantastic. I like this one, be better with it being a teaching assistant. I agree with that. Learning how to communicate clearly helps us be better teachers, which is really important in higher ed. And then a stretch goal of being a keynote speaker at launch events for products and I guess the technical area. That would be very cool. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about increasing underrepresented minorities, the pipeline for them, for women in STEM in particular, expanding access, expanding interest, expanding that pipeline. That's fantastic. I'm seeing a lot of people just talking about wanting to just, share their work very broadly on a worldwide stage. That's fantastic. Chris Avery says this easy goal is to be able to write and publish papers that makes his work accessible to many fields. That's a great goal. And creating tools that are useful to many, many people. Communicating clearly is really important when you're working across fields. And I like your dream goal. It's very nerdy, but I've always dreamed of talking about my research on the Science Friday NPR show. Yes, that is a fantastic dream goal. So I'm going to wish you the very, very best in achieving that goal. Yes. That would be quite amazing. And I would also count that as a dream goal to be on Science Friday. Yes, that would be fantastic. All right. I love these goals, guys. I really am going to encourage you guys to work for these things and to really try to figure out how you can and get into them more. So they're in very kind of generally speaking, 4 different types of communication goals. And I mean communication in any kind of way now. 1 is to inform. I want to tell you about something. 2 is to requesting information from you. 3 is to persuade. This is like a call to action. I want to convince you to do something or convince you to agree about something or convince you about some set of beliefs, facts, attitudes, etc. And 4, to build relationships, to build up a rapport and establish a relationship with someone else or with a broad many someone else's. And so I think STEM researchers in general really love to live in that number 1 of to inform. I want to tell you about my cool work. I want to tell you about other people's cool work. I want to tell you about all these cool facts. We really like sharing our trivia facts with people a lot. And so that's great. And that's an excellent goal for STEM communicators. But I want to encourage you guys that really strong STEM engagement and engagement with the public really lives with numbers 2, 3, and 4 as well. Because presumably we don't just want to just tell all of the public about, all of our basic science trivia facts, but we also want to persuade them to make good decisions in public policy. We want to persuade them to make good decisions about public health and as consumers and as, people and human beings in this world. Perhaps we want to build out relationships. We want to connect in with a patient population that's of relevance to the health topic that you study. You want to build relationships with K-12 students and teachers because that's your research population, and you really want to build relationships and rapport and have that real world connection that can inspire and inform your work. But really just building those relationships is really important just for the sake of themselves, that you can not just be telling that community about your research, but also really kind of gaining from having those relationships and connections. And so I'm going to encourage you, as you think about your goals for your STEM communication, to think about the requesting, the persuading of the others, and the just simply building relationships and connecting with others, and using those goals above and beyond even just that I want to tell you about my cool science, inform you facts. So once you have your kind of goal for your communication in mind, the next thing you really have to think about is, who is your audience? And there could be several audiences that you're interested in. So you could be interested in talking to journalists. This could be for a newspaper, for example. Here at UNC Charlotte, we have the inside.uncc.edu media team who helps report out on cool STEM research going on here at UNC Charlotte. Maybe you're interested in talking with policymakers and their staff. So you want to talk with the staff that controls, let's say, a senator's legislation agenda, and you want to convince them that there's this body of scientific evidence that should inform their voting decision about a given piece of legislation. So you want your work to shape that policy and to influence that policymaker. I saw a lot of people mention goals about giving good talks. A place that you might do that is at a conference, for example, giving conference presentations. Somebody mentioned having an elevator pitch, and having an elevator pitch at a conference is also fantastic. So when you have those quick hallway introductions with other people, they can say, "Oh, hey, here is so-and-so," and you can say, "This is who I am, this is my work," and you can just explain what you do, really quickly and succinctly. And that's really good for networking at a conference event. I have on here popular press readers. So you could be writing a popular science book that can get published and distributed widely. I think popular press readers could also be construed here as media consumers. And so those NPR Science Friday listeners could also be a great audience here as well. And so who is in their car listening to Science Friday? And they might be your audience. Your seatmate on a flight. So if we ever get back to flying again, you have been in that situation where the person next to you says, "Oh, so what do you do? Oh, so what do you study?" And they ask you the questions about these things. And so just talking to them, talking to your neighbors, the people you are around in everyday life about what it is you do. I think those are all great audiences. So big takeaway I want you guys to think about today is that STEM communication, it's not about you. It's not a personal branding exercise. It's not about building up your followers and about building up the cult of you. And this is true even if you're talking about your great idea, your product, your research. It's still not about you. And so you really, really need to think about speaking in a way that meets your audience's needs. What do you think you can tell them that would interest them? You got to really get in their shoes. And so I really love this figure for thinking about how you could take your one message, your research idea, your product, etc., and put that through this prism based on who your audience is, where you might think about changing how you frame your message to adapt it to a given audience. And so here's some examples of that. Let's say you're talking about your research with policymakers, right? Policymakers want to know, does this research, does it support my general agenda? Is this an issue that my constituents care about? All right. If you're talking with a journalist, you might want to know, what outlet does that journalist write for? What angle does she typically take? They want to know, is this newsworthy? Is it going to be of interest to my readership? Is it a hot topic? That's the things that journalists are interested in. If you're talking to an NGO, a non-government organization, they might want to know how this research or this idea that you're pitching, how does that mesh with the focus or mission of this organization or agency? Okay, so how do you fit in with their bigger mission statement? And so the idea here is really simply that every audience is going to interpret information through their own lens. And so understanding that lens will really help you frame your message as effectively as possible so that your audience is going to take home the message that you want to convey. So as you're thinking about your audience, I'm always pushing this idea on people of getting them to think about what I call the so what. So you research a protein enzyme. So what? Why do I care about that? Why is that cool to me? So you really want to, again, think about what the audience values. Why should your audience care about your research? What's important for them to know about your work? And why are you talking to them about it? And these are the things that you really want to put right up front in your STEM communication. This is what you got to get hit instantly when you're connecting with people. And that buys you their attention to listen into the details about the rest of your research topic. So different audiences are going to be interested in different facets of your work. So you really want your message to be tailored to reflect their interests and to accommodate their needs. And so these are, again, just some questions that I think about as I'm thinking about my audience and thinking about what it is that they're going to value. So how does this information maybe impact them? Is it about them? Is it about somebody they care about? Maybe that's who is being impacted. What is it that's important for them to understand? And then once you've really thought clearly about who your audience is, the next thing you're really going to think about is what communication channel you're going to be using. And so people talked about, traditional academic channels on here of teaching and giving research-based talks, for example, or going to conferences. But other people mentioned things like working in a classroom setting or being on the radio, other kinds of platforms as well. Social media is obviously a huge channel for talking about your STEM research and for connecting with others and building relationships with other people. That's a great platform. And so this is really important because it's interesting to think about how STEM communication channels have really evolved and changed over the past several decades. And so it really used to be that communication was really a one-way street. I'm a scientist, I have my cool facts, I convey them to you, the public. But now things have changed and we have social media, and communication is now really a two-way street. And it's a two-way street where people are not just interested in like absorbing your facts, but also talking back to you about the work that you're putting out. And so it's really changed the dynamic of how we need to engage with others. So I'm going to talk to you guys about some general public speaking tips next. All right, and in the chat, you guys tell me how comfortable or how scary do you think public speaking is? Is it like, is it okay? Is it, oh, I'm really afraid of public speaking. It sounds like the worst thing ever. I want to learn, but I'm also a little afraid of it, or I feel pretty good about it. I've done it a couple times. I could probably get better, but I've got some legs under me. We use the chat function here to tell me a little bit about how you feel about public speaking. Well, I'm going to talk to you about some basic public speaking tips. All right, so these are just my general tips for speaking to public audiences, and this works for virtual, this works for in-person, any kind of platform, really. You generally need to slow down. I'm seeing in the chat this idea, increased heart rate, get a little nervous when we get that adrenaline pumping, which often happens when you're up on a stage in front of an audience. One of the things that happens when you get that adrenaline surge is it makes you talk quickly. And so I find that especially in the beginning of your talk, if you slow down and you talk really slowly, it will actually sound completely normal to your audience because you're probably speaking at a normal pace. You just in your head feel like you're talking and slowing down intentionally. Because what you want to do is you got to slow it down, slow it down. It's generally good to speak loud enough for your audience to hear. We're pretty good about mics, but knowing how to project, knowing how to use a mic, especially if you're in an in-person event. Mics are really about the audience. They're not necessarily about you, but it's for people who have the hearing issues and they really need the mic to amplify the speaker in order to hear them clearly. Another good tip is to vary your pitch, your tone, and your volume to emphasize keywords and points. This is one that I find I really struggle with. And so for me, I want to think about sometimes going louder, but maybe also sometimes going a little softer and leaning in a little bit so that you catch people's interest, that volume change. I think people practice that and get better at it as they go. The avoiding filler words, I think most people know that, and with practice, that makes it easier. I find this really helpful, especially if you're giving a talk that's pretty new to you, to practice a lot, and not just practice, but actually kind of write out what you're going to say in advance, and to use that written script and basically practice it enough that you can sound like you're talking off the cuff, but in reality, you had really planned out all of those words you were going to say. And so that's a good tip and an art to that. And then we've been talking along the way about word choice matters. For different audiences, you need different words. So for the participant here who is talking about engaging with reading interventions for K3 students, K3 students need really different words than your college students, than your academic job talk audience. Everybody there needs a different set of words to describe that exact same message. All right. And so now we're going to talk about some potential barriers to effectively achieving your goals for communicating with others. So one huge barrier for some researchers is this idea of this cognitive bias known as the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is the idea that once you become an expert in something, it's really hard to remember what it was like before that. You're now like, I totally get this concept. I'm an expert in this concept. And you forget what it was like when you were still a novice. And I think that you all have an advantage when it comes to the cursive knowledge as graduate students, because you're experts and you're growing experts and you're gaining all that knowledge and expertise, but you still remember what it was like to be a novice. It wasn't so long ago for you that you were just really starting out in whatever it is your field of choice. So tell me in the chat here if you've ever had a PI or a teacher who suffered from the curse of knowledge and maybe was trying to explain some really, high-level concepts and just really struggled with how to get that across clearly to somebody who was just starting out. I'm a novice. I don't have all this background knowledge. I don't know what you're saying. So tell me in the chat here if you've ever encountered the curse of knowledge, say working with your PI mentor who is trying to tell you what to do or trying to explain some area of the literature. And they're like, oh, you know this thing. Like, of course, you know this big topic. And it's hard for them to break it down into that little easier to digest pieces of information that you can actually get so you understand what they're saying. I'm hearing, yes, my Chem Lab TA. I suffer from it as a TA sometimes. Yes. Yeah, I think when we're teaching, we're learning how to overcome the curse of knowledge so that we can explain things to our students in a clear terms. And sometimes we don't realize how much background knowledge we're assuming others have. And sometimes it's not a good assumption. And so how do you overcome the curse of knowledge? Well, I'm going to help give you some tools and some ideas for how to communicate clearly. But a big takeaway is really thinking about, am I assuming my audience has some facts in their background? And is it really fair to assume that? Maybe I really need to break things down so that I'm not making any kind of assumptions about background knowledge here and working in from that lens. And I'll tell you, even an expert in a field will appreciate a really well done, really clear explanation. So going really basic, it works for everybody. Even somebody who's like the superstar in your field, they will appreciate a good, clear explanation. So there's a book that I like called Made to Stick that talks about why some ideas survive and others die. And it's really written about consumer products and marketing campaigns and why some marketing campaigns get really stuck in our pop culture consciousness and other things are gone in a nanosecond. And so they have these these 6 ideas about what makes an idea sticky, as they call it. And sticky here means memorable. And so they say ideas are sticky when they're simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, they have emotion to them, or they are part of a story. So let's talk about what some of these concepts might mean. So ideas are sticky when they're simple. So they're highlighting here, simple isn't about dumbing down, it's about prioritizing. Again, your audience doesn't want you to overwhelm them with all the details of all the pieces of your protocol of your research. They just want the basic bottom line. It helps if you can surprise your audience. So if you like, a good hook is to tell somebody something that was unexpected, to violate their expectations in some way. That captures people's attention really, really well. Ideas are also sticky when they're really concrete. So a great STEM communication tip is to use very, very concrete sensory language. Right? This is where you want to paint a picture for folks and use very, very visual, very sensory oriented language, regardless of what your topic is, regardless of what you're studying. Try to put it in really concrete visual terms. As scientists and STEM researchers, we already have a leg up on the idea of credibility. You're earning your degrees, you're becoming an authentic, credible expert in your field of choice. And so this gives us an automatic badge, if you will, with the public, where I'm credible in this area that I'm talking about. I know my stuff. I get that badge already. Emotion, it's really helpful to connect in to, again, what's going to be impactful for that audience and what matters for them. So, thinking about if you're working in, say, an area of health research, who is the patient population? What is their story? If you're thinking about, your K-12 reading interventions, what are the emotions that go along with having problems or difficulties reading as a kid? What does that feel like? And then using some of those ideas to help tell a story. The human brain absolutely loves stories. And so if you can frame your research as a story that you're telling your audience will just hook on to every single word that you say. And in fact, I really think a great tip when you're opening up a talk for somebody is to, just tell a quick story that relates to something you're going to talk about in your work. It could be a little story or anecdote about how you made a particular discovery, about what got you into the field, about how you got connected in with the audience today. Tell a little story about yourself. It's really endearing for people to hear this. So building off this idea of making knowledge concrete, and overcoming the curse of knowledge by using very concrete, simple terms, is this tip for you guys of using metaphors and analogies for new concepts. And so it's really helpful for public audiences if the speaker can draw comparisons between a new concept and some concept they're already familiar with. And so they can talk about, so I have an example here that's coming from cell biology, because I'm a biologist. That's my undergraduate degree, was in biology. And so we think about the cell as a city. I could talk to you about mitochondria being the power plants of the cell. They generate the energy for the cell. Okay. And so presumably not all of you knew what mitochondria were, but you knew what a power plant was, and you get that power plants make energy. If I tell you mitochondria are the power plants of the cell, you're like, I get it. They make energy for the cell. Excellent. I have this fact in my wheelhouse now. So metaphors and analogies are amazingly effective tools. All right. Again, to overcome the curse of knowledge, you got to think about this analogy here of building a bridge. So your audience is on one side of this body of water and you're on the other. And you're going to lead them across this body of water by building a bridge of knowledge. And you want to think extremely, extremely intentionally about, where's my audience at right now? How do I hook in the next piece of information, the next piece of information, the next piece of information? Think very, very clearly about the order that you're giving information to. What order best makes sense for people? How do I need to lead you down this path so you land up at the conclusion that's my ultimate goal for you guys to achieve today? And so one thing I find is that students in particular, and undergrad students, and this is graduate students, a real common issue I see is that folks just want to dive right in the deep end. Just jump right in the deep end of the pool. And they overwhelm people with way too much detail without giving a proper introduction and lead up. And that just leaves your audience totally lost. They don't know what you're talking about. They need that context. So you always, always, always want to provide the big picture context for your work. Then you can build out the details. Then you build out your bridge. I'm going to go through here my last few slides and share with you guys some just general best practices. One thing I always like to remember to tell students is to be really explicit. Always say the basics. And so here I'll tell a little story. When I was working with undergraduates in software engineering, it's a 120-person course here at UNC Charlotte. And in that course, they work in teams to build tech products, like they build web applications, they build apps you could put on your phone, they build databases, they build bots that can do things. Okay. And I was working with these undergraduates to teach them how to give an elevator pitch about this product that they're developing in the class. And so, we frame it like, okay, you could be giving this elevator pitch to an industry investor who might be an investor in your product to help you bring it to market or bring it up to scale, for example. Or maybe you're talking with business leaders who are making a decision about adopting this technology product that you've built. So you've got to tell your audience about your great idea and sell them on it. And so undergrads are working here on writing their own elevator pitch about their tech product. And then they had an opportunity to practice and to get feedback and to work on these elevator pitches. Y'all, I cannot tell you how many people would simply forget to tell me what their basic product was. They would go through a 2-minute talk and tell me all these tech details and completely fail to tell me like what their actual basic product was. Was it an app I'm putting on my phone? Is it a bot? Is it something that just lives on the internet? Is it a user interface for online shopping? Like, what is the thing you're building? So always say the basics. Always start with the basic context. And then another key best practice is to define your terms and acronyms. And in STEM, we have a lot of terms and acronyms, including STEM. And so it doesn't make you sound smart to use a lot of jargon. It doesn't make you sound smart to use a lot of fancy terms. You always want to define your terms from clear, simple, plain language. Your audience will thank you. Your audience will like you all the better when you clearly define your terms for them. And that doesn't mean you can never use scientific terms because they're part of our research. That's fine. You just need to explain them clearly first. I give a lot of talks to senior level administration here at UNC Charlotte, like let's say folks in the chancellor's cabinet. And the higher up in level that I'm giving a talk, the more and more I use this best practice idea of rounding the numbers and statistics that I give. As a scientist, I was, really grounded in this idea of precision. You want to give so many significant digits to your explanations and to your findings, and have your table with lots of decimal points, right? But it's really hard for people to wrap their head around what, a 4.002588910 is. Like, that doesn't make any sense to anyone, of course. And so you really want to think about using numbers and statistics sparingly. They can be very effective and very powerful tools, but don't overuse it. And you generally want to round your numbers. So as an example, when I talk about UNC Charlotte, I don't say that we have 30,164 students. I say we have over 30,000 students and growing. Okay, round the numbers. The precision doesn't matter so much here. It also helps if you're working on a very big, very small scale to think about comparing things to something people can relate to. So this is building off the idea of a metaphor, but it's for numbers. So, hey, folks in nanoscale technology here, this one is for you. When you're talking about your work, you've got to give people some conceptual understanding of the size and scale that you're working on. So think about some real world objects that people would know and know what they look like, know what their size are. And can you compare the work that you're doing to something on that scale? So feel free to put in the chat here some ideas that you might have for how you might think about nanoscale work and how you might talk about the size of what you're doing. So is it talking about, this is the tip of my pen and I'm working on a molecule that can fit on 1/8 of the tip of my pen. Think about something like that. Maria in the chat here has a question. How does STEM communication differ from STEM non-technical communication? Maria, I'm not sure I understand what your question is. Do you want to put some more in the chat about STEM to STEM communication. Is that what you mean, Maria? Like talking about STEM with other STEM scientists? Okay. So how does talking about STEM with other STEM people differ from talking about STEM to non-STEM people? It doesn't. All of these best practices absolutely should be in place for effective communication when you're talking to other STEM researchers as well. Of course, y'all are going to have shorthand, especially if you're in the same discipline where you can more quickly and easily understand each other's jargon. But even in the case when you're talking to other STEM folks, it's still good practice to define your terms and to very clearly explain what you mean. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with graduate students and they're all using the same term, but they all have like a slightly different understanding of what it is that means. And it turns out they're not very clear. And so if we all kind of got on the same page and used some basic definitions, we would all have a much more productive conversation because we'd all be on the same page about what this terminology means. And so while it's easier to fall into that shorthand when you're talking to people in your field, I think all the tips I'm presenting today are just all good general best practices, regardless of who the audience is. So hopefully, Maria, that answers your question or gives you some answer to your question. It's a really common tip to say avoid jargon. It's still hard for people who are used to using certain words in their everyday work for them to identify what terms are jargon to others. What are like our weird vocabulary things that don't make sense to people outside our field. So I suggest you even have a chance to share your work with a friend and ask a friend outside of your discipline area to identify any problematic terms. Like, what are things here that you don't understand? And sometimes we'll find that similar fields or different fields have different words for the same concept. So I, in my research, for example, would use terms like independent variables and dependent variables. And when I talk with my machine learning team over in CCI, they call those same things features and outcomes. I'm like, okay, features, independent variables, got it. But we just have very different words for the same concepts. So I have something I'd like you guys to do to talk about this idea of jargon. And what I'd love for you all to do is, if you could, open up a web browser, because we're all online anyways here. And I want you to go to this website that I've put on the slide here. And I'm going to write it into the chat box as well. I can type it in correctly. And this is a really fun tool called the UpGoer 5 text editor. Okay, so hopefully I wrote that in correctly. You can tell me if I have a typo there. So I would love you to go to that link, open it up in a web browser. And what this is a little text editor where you write in what you want to say in this text box. So maybe you can write in here a sentence or two about your research topic or something you've learned in a course or anything you want here. And once you hit enter on this text box, it is going to highlight for you in red, underline, any word that is not one of the 1,000 most used words in the English language. That's not very many words. And you're going to find you probably write something where a lot of things are not in the 1,000 most used words. And so I want to give you guys just a minute here to play around in this text editor. Try to explain maybe the research study you're working on this semester, what you are interested in maybe working on as a topic, and then try to edit what you're writing to pass this screener so that all of the words pass this test of being in the top 1,000 most common words in the English language. I'm going to give you all a minute here. Yes, sometimes I am very surprised by what it says. Sometimes I'm like, seriously, that's not in the top. Sometimes it baffles me. How could this not be a common word? But it makes you be very, very honest in your communication, and makes you kind of rethink what is really the most critical things to say here, and how can I say it in the most plain, simple words possible. I'm seeing in the chat, some people are saying, oh gosh, this is really difficult. I tried 3 times. I failed. Oh, I finally got something that works. Benke realizing that some common science terms like DNA not in the top 100 most common English words. So yes, it is really challenging. Destiny, I like yours. Water is needed for human life. Yes, it is. Is fresh water allowed? Is that would fresh water be? So she says no to the fresh water. So this is a really tough task, guys. You really have to think about things. Neha says wastewater is not allowed. I wonder if waste and water separately would be allowed, or bad water, or used water. So I love the insights that you guys are realizing, where it's like, man, my whole research topic is not on this list. Now what do I do? Oh, that means that I'm working in an area that includes a lot of terms that are probably unfamiliar to most people. And now you have a challenge. Now you have some challenge to figure out, how do you overcome that? All right. So I'll give you an example that I did of my own work here. I love the things you guys are saying. So I took a sentence from one of my scientific papers. It's like the first sentence in an abstract, and it's long and it has a lot of like fancy words in it. It's about attention and distraction and how our brains mediate those things. And I whittled that down in the Upcover 5 text editor to the sentence: your past matters for what you pay attention to and for what you ignore. And so I had to really just not think about substituting words, because information wasn't in the top 1,000 words. I couldn't just find what's a synonym for information that is now allowable because it's in this list of words. It's not just about finding synonyms, but it's really about crystallizing your idea to that plain, simple, basic insight that you want people to have, and really maybe even rethinking, what's the real point of what I'm saying? It's not just necessarily subbing words to get past this. And I love the things you guys are coming up with in the in the chat here. Somebody says, using our body to help us understand what is going on in our minds for people who are having thinking and remembering problems. Oh, yes. Thinking and remembering problems, because probably things like dementia or cognitive difficulties, these things would not be in the top 1,000 words. I like it a lot. Exactly what she says. Yeah, so this is a really super challenging task to get past the Upcover 5 text editor's flagging of words. And it's a pretty extreme scenario, but I think it is really useful for helping us think about, okay, rather than using all of my default words that would be my normal, full of jargon words that I would use to explain this concept, how can I really stretch myself to use just basic plain English to explain my concepts? And so I find this is helpful if you're thinking about audiences where you really, really want to use basic plain language to talk with. Can you get a message through here cleanly? and let it go forward there. I love the examples you guys are coming up with in the chat. Where you live matters, from how long you live to how you die. That is an excellent example of how science is research in plain language there, epidemiology in plain language. Where you live matters for how long you live and how you die. That's a really great way. I like that. Let's see. Another person says, this worked. How you drive can save your life. That's wonderful. I love it. Yes. I definitely feel like I can understand what that is and where you're coming from, and also like why I care now about what it is you're researching, because I want to know how to drive well. I want to know how to save lives. I like that, guys. So we talked about the final stage here of evaluating your communication plan. So you talked with somebody else, you engaged on Twitter, you gave a lecture, you talked to a K-3 classroom, you were on Science Friday, and you got to talk to all these NPR listeners. How do you know if you achieved your communication goal? How do you know if you were successful? So I want you to think about some ideas for what you might know. So some tips for evaluating this is really thinking about, again, connecting back to that goal you had for communication. So if your goal is to inform, you should be able to evaluate how well you did by the types of questions you get asked. You could give a real quick feedback survey to say, okay, did they get this key concept? Did this key concept stick? Okay. If you're doing something like, though, persuading others, if you really have a call to action in your communication plan, I want to encourage people to get the flu vaccination. Well, then maybe your evaluation of your communication is how many people took you up on that call to action. Did it actually change people's behavior? Or did it change people's attitudes? Or did you change people's beliefs? You might need to find evidence to see if you can support, that conclusion from your work. We evaluate the effectiveness of communication quite often in many different real world scenarios, but we don't always think about this as STEM scientists. And so I'm pushing you guys and encouraging you guys to think about this topic. So an easy example would be the CDC has certainly evaluated what types of anti-smoking campaigns are most effective at getting people to either quit or not start smoking. And so we've learned, for example, like that really graphic, scary ads that show the really serious health effects that can come on board can happen if you are a lifetime smoker. Those are the things that are most effective at getting people freaked out enough that they're like, okay, yeah, I don't even want to touch that. Not good for me. The little like tiny fine print on a package of cigarettes that says, this may possibly cause lung cancer in some people, according to the Surgeon General. Not so effective. Not so effective. And so that's an example of evaluating different communication plans. So I'm going to talk one other strategy. I'm going to evaluate you guys, how well I've achieved my communication plan for the day. So one of my goals in communicating to graduate students about effective STEM communication is to teach you guys something new, that you're walking away with a tip or an idea, a way of thinking that you didn't have before. I've added to your toolbox. And so in order to evaluate how effective I've been at communicating with you guys, what I would love you to do is in the chat here, tell me what tip from today most surprised you. People said they like the success model. It's a really, really good book. I really recommend that book. It's a fun read. I learned so much about different marketing campaigns from that book, about what makes an idea sticky. I really love it. Speaking slowly does not sound weird to hear. Yes, I guarantee you, you will sound fine to your audience. They will appreciate it. The 1,000 words tool. Yes, it was very challenging. The most useful tool from today, according to Bryce. Yes, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. A lot of people liked that. Maria says, effective communication is not about me. It's about my audience. So glad that was your take home point. That's just the best thing you can learn here. Vary the tone of voice. I like that. A lot of people like the word editing tool. I know it's such a cool find. I love that this is just like a website that you can go to and you can try out different things in it. Ooh, I like this one from Sarvani. The fact that building relationships with the audience makes it more effective rather than just trying to inform. Absolutely. Connecting into those core audience values. Thinking about, what does my audience care about? What matters to them? How do I tell them how what I'm going to talk about meets that value? And then I've opened the door so they want to listen. They want to learn more. I love all your tips here. Wonderful. So exciting. That's so great, guys. So I always love to tell graduate students about great resources at UNC Charlotte. So you've already found the Center for Graduate Life because you're here in their webinar. I also like to tell you about Ventureprise, particularly for folks working in, say, technology, in engineering, in some of our more applied research settings. If you're building a product, you're making a material, you're doing something that could be patentable or that could have industry interest, this is an office on campus that is built to work with graduate and undergraduate students to help connect you with industry folks. And they help people explain their great products and their great ideas to industry business leaders, for example, and connect you in with different expertise and resources for kind of taking your great idea and leveling up to whatever the next level is. And so they work a lot with communicating in that regard, because they coach people on how to talk to business and industry executives. And they really give you the tools and tips to make you successful in that venue. And so if any of the work that you're doing has that kind of applied bent to it, I encourage you to check that out. On UNC Charlotte's campus, they're physically located over in the Portal building. And I think that they just do really cool things. So lovely. All right. And now I'm going to open up the floor here for general questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Let's see everybody. So you're welcome to unmute yourself and talk through the microphone or to put your questions in the chat. But we have about 4 minutes left here. And if you have any burning questions, I'd love to hear them.
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that the whole concept of like the post-truth, that whole concept is crazy, but it's really important to make an emotional connection with your audience. So like understanding like their values and who you're talking to is extremely important so that you can get past that. Like there's some kind of emotion attached to the facts that we're presenting, and that's like invaluable.
Yeah, it's amazing how you can think, these are just basic facts we're talking about people, but facts are no longer facts. And I completely agree that understanding how to connect in with people on their values, on that emotional level, that's how you can get on the same page about everything else too. All right, there's a question in the chat. Any tip on avoiding verbal crutches? So I'm imagining here you mean things like the Any kind of things that we fill our speech with? Yes. My now 6-year-old has a verbal crutch that's kind of funny. When he is talking to me or talking to his family and he's just not sure quite what he wants to say yet, he goes, well, the thing is, well, you see, the thing is, you see, Mom, the thing is, and he says this all the time. It's very funny. And so I think practice is really key and getting comfortable with what you want to say. I really like the idea of writing out what you want to talk about beforehand. Even that 2-minute elevator pitch, you write it out. And in fact, the shorter your communication, the more you probably need to write it out and edit it in order for it to be really successful. And so having it written out will allow you to sort of memorize what you're going to say. And even then, if it sounds like you're ad-libbing, it sounds like you're talking off the cuff, but really you had, from the beginning, you knew what you wanted to say. And I find that when you do that advanced planning and that advanced editing, it will cut down on those filler words. Another question in here, any tips for lightning talk? 6 minutes. I've got one next week. Yes. So common misconception is that a short talk is easier than a long talk. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. The shorter the talk, the actual way harder it is to be successful. So I would say for a 6-minute talk, I would absolutely write it out what you're going to say. Think about what is my most important piece of information to convey, if it's really an informed talk that you're giving, and really outline that major point. And less is more. Give your content some space to breathe. You don't have to cram in every detail of your protocol. And a fantastic tip is that leaving your audience wanting more information is a really good thing. So if you give them just the basic highlights and then they're asking you tons and tons of follow-up questions, that's perfect. That's great. You don't have to give them all of those details up front. You can leave them wanting a little bit more. All right, my CTL folks, are you guys doing the 3-minute thesis competition this year?
We are doing it. We're doing it a little bit differently from in the past. We're going to be accepting, well, folks need to apply by the 19th, and then we're going to send them instructions. Jill, correct me if I'm explaining this incorrectly. And then,
No, that's right.
Oh, go ahead.
I just said, no, that sounds right to me.
Oh, yeah. So after you apply, then we're going to send you instructions for how to submit a video. So you'll record yourself with your slide and send that in for the preliminary rounds. But yeah, I think everybody should participate in 3MT. I think it's super fun. And even if you don't win, you're still going to benefit from it because you can only improve your communication skills by participating. So you should definitely consider entering. And I guess, yeah, Jill just put a link to the registration form right there.
That's a fabulous communication exercise. You get one slide in 3 minutes to talk about your research topic. And
yeah.
It is a hard platform, but it is so much fun to see what people come up with.
And also great to have that video to post on your LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's funny. Did you see what I did there? How I didn't explain what 3MT was at all, and that was sort of maybe the point.
I always say the basics.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Elise. This has been super informative and really entertaining too with the Splasho thing. I think I'm going to play with that later today. I just wanted to let you guys know before we leave that the next Thursday, the second in our 8-part series, is going to be about preparing for an international STEM experience. And Ivana Garibaldi Campbell is going to be facilitating that workshop. If you guys attended her A to I workshop this past Friday, you know she's an awesome speaker. So please join us next week. And also, please join us tomorrow for the next A to I workshop, which will be at 11 o'clock. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful talking to you guys. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for all of the cool things you said
Thank
through the
you.
chat. That was very fun.
Thank you guys. Bye.